In the next few minutes, you're going to understand completely the difference between sensitivity and specificity. My name is João and this is the Meta-Analysis Academy, where we teach thousands of students from hundreds of countries how to do systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Let's go. Alright, so both sensitivity and specificity are measures of how good a test is. However, they're completely separate metrics that answer different questions. Sensitivity is the probability that a test will be positive if you have a disease. Specificity is the probability that a test will be negative if you don't have a disease. I get that that's confusing, but just bear with me because I'm going to tell you a story, and with that story, you're going to understand this concept. I promise. Let's go. Imagine that a patient comes to the ER with chest pain and shortness of breath. You immediately suspect pulmonary embolism, and then you ask for a D-dimer test. Now, the D-dimer has a very high sensitivity of around 95 to 99%. That means that if the patient truly has a pulmonary embolism, the D-dimer test will most likely be positive. As in, it will almost always, 95 to 99% of the time, be positive in the case. However, the D-dimer has a very low specificity. It ranges from 40 to 60% depending on the source material. So if the patient does not have a pulmonary embolism, it's still possible that the D-dimer test is positive. And that's because many other things other than pulmonary embolism can raise your D-dimer. Examples include infection, inflammation, pregnancy, cancer. The conclusion to all of this is if the sensitive test that you ordered, which is the D-dimer, comes back negative, you can probably be really reassured that the person does not have a pulmonary embolism. So you rule it out. If this video is helping you so far, leave a like and subscribe. Okay, let's keep going with our story. Now imagine that instead of negative, you get a positive D-dimer test. You know this does not confirm pulmonary embolism since the test is not very specific because the person could have a pulmonary embolism or could just be pregnant or have trauma or have cancer. You know, they could have a great number of other things, but the fact that you had a sensitive test means that you cannot rule out that the person had pulmonary embolism. So you need a very specific test for pulmonary embolism to confirm that the D-dimer was not elevated by other diseases. In that case, you're going to go for a CT pulmonary angiography. This is an imaging test, not a blood test, and this is very specific, ranging from 95 to 98% specific. Now that means something else. That means that if the person does not show up with a pulmonary embolism on the pulmonary CT scan, then that's probably very unlikely that they have the pulmonary embolism. And that's what specificity means. The probability that if the test is negative, you actually don't have the disease. Now the CT angiography has a good sensitivity of around 85 to 90%, but the specificity is what makes it really special. So when the CT scan shows a clot, you can probably most confidently say that person has a pulmonary embolism. This can confirm the diagnosis. So in real life, we have first a very sensitive test to avoid missing a diagnosis. And then afterwards, we have a very specific test to make sure that we're right about that said diagnosis. So just to recap for you, sensitivity and specificity show how good a test is. However, they both answer different questions. Sensitivity is the probability that the test will be positive given that you have the disease. And in that case, if they're negative, they're very useful in ruling out a disease. And an example of this is that if you have a negative D-dimer, it's probably very unlikely that you have a pulmonary embolism. And then you would not even think about taking an image of your lungs because, you don't have a pulmonary embolism. So why worry about that? It's something else. You should look for another cause of the symptoms. Now, specificity is the probability that when you don't have the disease, that the test will be negative. That's why highly specific tests, when they're positive, they will absolutely be useful in making sure that you have the disease tested. So in this approach, you have a patient with chest pains and with shortness of breath. You ask for a D-dimer and it's positive, but it could be positive for many reasons, not just pulmonary embolism. So you get a very specific test to prove your suspicion that they do have a pulmonary embolism. And then when you look at that image and you see that big clot, you make sure you're right. In short, we screen using very sensitive tests so that we don't miss any diagnosis. And then we confirm our diagnosis with very specific tests. So that's it, guys. I hope you now have a better understanding about what sensitivity is, about what specificity is. And if you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments below. We're going to be happy to answer them as soon as possible. Subscribe for the new videos of the Meta-Analysis Academy YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.